Today's program with Robin Clifford Wood is another unique program. Robin is a Horace Greeley High School graduate. She's also an author, a poet, a blogger, and an essayist. She has a Bachelor of Arts from Yale University and a master's in English from the University of Rochester and an MFA, Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of Southern Maine's Stone Coast program. Her work has been featured in Port City Life magazine, Bangor Metro, and Bangor Daily. Kirkus, which many of you might know, is a magazine that evaluates books, which is putting it in a nice, easy way, wrote a 4-star review for her. And they say, Wood's passionate prose and careful curated primary sources will certainly convince readers that Field is not a writer to overlook. An eloquent, detailed tribute to a less well-known but inspiring author, from Kirkus Reviews. So please, one other thing, she won, she was a finalist in a book award, the American Book Fest 18th Annual Best Book Award competition. So please welcome Robin Woods. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joan. What a lovely introduction, but also what an impressive array of programming you have at the Chappaqua Library. I think it's fabulous that you have so much going on, and I'm very grateful to you and to the Chappaqua Library for including me in your rich repertoire. I'm so excited to be here. I had so hoped to come to my hometown library in person for multiple reasons, partly because I have a couple of sisters who still live in that area, and it would have been nice to have an excuse to go visit them. But alas, COVID is still keeping its grip on the world, and so remote is next best. But the other nice thing about remote is that I know it means that we can get people from far afield that wouldn't be able to attend an in-person thing. So welcome to everybody, and thank you for coming. And I gather this is a webinar version, so I can't see your lovely faces, but I'm happy to have you guys share comments or questions in the chat box. I may not see them myself as I'm presenting, but Joan will keep an eye on the chat box. And if you have a question along the way, I'd be happy to answer it. And there will be time for questions at the end as well. I'm hoping by the time we're done today, you will not only have a sense of what this book is all about that I wrote, but also maybe I hope that you'll get a little bit intrigued by Rachel Field, who is, who my husband likes to call her the most successful, renowned writer you've never heard of, because nowadays many people have never heard of Rachel Field. But she was a National Book Award winner. She was the first woman to win the Newbery Award for children's literature. She won a Caldecott posthumously. She published poetry prolifically, so fiction, nonfiction, children's literature, poetry. And then at the end of her life, she moved to Hollywood because she had books made into films. 3 of her books were made into films. The first one was nominated for Best Picture and starred Bette Davis and Charles Boyer. And she was a rising star in Hollywood back in the 1930s and early 40s. So she was really a very big deal, and then died prematurely. And I had the very good fortune, serendipitously, to stumble into the house that was Rachel's muse, her precious summer home on an island in Maine called Sutton Island. And my husband and I ended up actually buying the very house that she lived in for 20 years. She spent even more than that on the island in another house, but then purchased this house in 1922. And the house had been empty for 8 years by the time we moved into it. And we slowly made our own imprint on the house, but this is an island with no roads. You only get there by ferry boat. And when people move off, they tend to leave everything there. So I lived amidst the same furniture Rachel sat in, her books, her magazines in the attic, some mail with her name on it. And she became really an important part of my life in many unexpected ways. And I think I'd like to start by reading you a bit of the prologue, because this introduces the general idea behind the book. In 1994, my husband and I purchased a long abandoned wood frame house on an island off the coast of Maine. In the 1920s and 30s, it had been the summer home of author Rachel Field on the island that inspired her most successful work, the poetry, plays, children's books, and novels that took her from struggling writer to Newbery medalist, National Book Award winner, then rising Hollywood success. At the peak of her renown, she died suddenly and unexpectedly, leaving so many stories untold, including her own. When I first walked into that island home that had been her magical place, her muse, some of those stories reached out tendrils looking for a place to attach themselves. I felt their presence in the flutters of my heart, but didn't know at the time what it meant. Many people know the sensation of entering an old house and feeling something of its history in the air. It whispers from the corners, buzzes indecipherably in the motes of dust illuminated by a ray of sunlight through wavy glass. The building retains some indefinable quality left behind by its former inhabitants, some of their energy lingering in the atmosphere. On an island with no roads, only footpaths and wooden wheelbarrows, the leavings of former inhabitants are not just figurative. Rachel's weighty wooden sleigh bed is still there in the room where she slept. The old wicker chairs in front of the fireplace creak under my weight as they creaked under hers. Her Scotty dog trinkets and paraphernalia wait expectantly, pointy ears on alert, on shelves and in drawers. I sit on the front porch, the covered piazza, as Rachel called it, and I contemplate the same view of Seal Harbor and Acadia National Park's Rocky Top Mountains across an expanse of sea called the Eastern Way. That same view inspired Rachel's creative work, her joy, and her loneliness. Rachel's life was not easy. It was not all fairy houses and moon glow or silver streaks of rain on city streets or soaring gulls alighting gracefully on the barnacled rocks of an island off the coast of Maine, even though her work is alive with all those wonders. It wasn't a life of deep deprivation either. Her family had enough means to get by and the social status to be accepted into most echelons of the stratified society of her time. The difficulties in Rachel's life were more situational and internal. First, there was her physical presence. Many who knew her effervescent spirit on the page were shocked to meet Rachel for the first time. For she was not the elfin sprite they expected, but a woman of imposing stature and heavy masculine features. Her warmth quickly eclipsed superficial impressions. She had a lightness about her, something open and engaging that made people feel like an old friend at her kitchen table. Nevertheless, her exterior self caused her a lifetime of rue. I also sensed that her story was weighty with much deeper disappointments, even before I'd begun my research. There were shadows of loss, heartbreak, secrecy, a sister gone mad, an improper marriage, infertility, a child who seemed to disappear. So many unanswered questions. But Rachel's story, I was certain, held more than anything a prodigious share of redemption and hopefulness. I was certain not only because of Rachel's work, but because I inhabited her space. So I'm gonna start out by showing you, I'm gonna share with you a picture of this island so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. Whoops. And here we go. So this is the view from in front of our house on Sutton Island, which is, and we're looking across, if any of you are familiar with Acadia National Park near Bar Harbor, this is what we're looking at. We're looking directly north at Seal Harbor, and the mountains you can see are Cadillac Mountain, which is, people argue is the first place to see the sunrise in the United States. And there's Pematic Mountain and Sargent and Penobscot, and that's our daily view. And here's a sunrise, again, from just outside our house, the house that I shared with Rachel. And here is the house. It is a multi-building house built up on brick piers, and there's a deck that wraps around most of it. This is one side view of it. This is looking from behind it up towards the northern vista over the sea, and you could see it's quite close to the water. And we have the good fortune of having drone shots for the first time in the last year. My husband got a drone as a Christmas present from our 4 children. And so we have some aerial views for the very first time ever. And there's, again, a shot of Acadia National Park to the north, across the water from our house, which you could see in the foreground. And here I am with my dog, Clara. So this is the setting of the place that Rachel and I share. Rachel Field bought this house in 1922. She first came to Sutton Island as a young teenager in 1911, and she stayed at a house just north and east of here, the furthest away from the town dock on this island. So it's a mile walk to our house, and the one she first stayed in. And she fell in love with Sutton Island, as I did, the very first time she set foot in this region. She came to study art. She was also an artist and an illustrator, and did not do well in school. One of her many insecurities was not just about her appearance, but the fact that she couldn't read until she was 10 years old. She memorized poetry. She memorized every part in the plays that her elementary school put on, and she loved listening to books being read aloud to her, but she said she literally could write before she could read because she was too lazy to learn to read, is how she put it. So they sent her to learn art, thinking maybe because she wasn't so good in math and science and some other things that they'd cultivate her art. So that was her first introduction to Sutton Island. I actually also first came to Sutton Island as a teenager because my husband had connections to this island. And I'll be telling you more about this as time goes along. There you can see the multiple buildings. This building in the back, before Rachel's time, had been a laundry room. This house was built by a family in the early 1900s in a time when they came to the island for the summer with servants that lived all in the back quarters. And there's still a big old slop sink and a wood stove that had andirons and for ironing the clothes after washing them, and but not in Rachel's day nor mine. This was Rachel's writing studio, that laundry room, and now we have it as one of our guest rooms out there. And this is just to orient you to Mount Desert Island. Sutton Island, I don't know if you could see my cursor circling around towards the bottom of your screen, but that's Sutton Island, which is one of the Cranberry Islands. There are 5 Cranberry Islands, and 2 of them have year-round populations, but Sutton Island is just a seasonal island. All right, I'm going to stop this share briefly and come back to talking to you a little bit. Let's see, sorry, get myself back oriented. Okay, so as I said during that talk about Rachel, that prologue, there were a lot of mysteries that I encountered. Once I started living amongst Rachel's things, I became really intrigued by the presence of this woman that was still lingering in this house. I was kind of wrapped up in being a mother to 4 children when I first came there. So I'm ashamed to say it took me 14 years to really get serious about trying to figure out who this woman was who had shared the same house with me. But I felt like her presence was with me right from the start. And once I started reading her work, especially her poetry, it really reached me. Her work was filled with delight. She had a deep appreciation for beauty. She had whimsical poetry about seagulls and dogs and spiders on a clock and elves and fairies and magical worlds, as well as the hurdy-gurdy man on the streets of New York City. She lived in New York City 8 months of the year and on Sutton Island 4 months of the year. So it was quite a contrast in the 2 worlds she was in. But as she said, Sutton Island was always with her, no matter whether she was writing on the island or writing from New York itself. But one of the things that really began to appeal to me or reach my heart was the fact that Rachel Field had these insecurities and things she struggled with. And this was such a common theme in much of her work. And I'm going to read you this one poem that was widely anthologized. This one was called My Inside Self. My inside self and my outside self are different as can be. My outside self wears gingham smocks, and very round is she, with freckles sprinkled on her nose and smoothly parted hair, and clumsy feet that cannot dance in heavy shoes and square. But oh, my little inside self in gown of misty rose, she dances lighter than a leaf on blithe and twinkling toes. Her hair is blowing gold, and if you chanced her face to see, you would not think she could belong to staid and sober me. And then she has another one that I put in the book here called The Quiet Child, where she's a very good girl during the day. And when she goes to bed, she turns into a wild, bad witch and crackles her thumbs and flies up over the rooftop. So many of her books, both for children and for adults, end up revolving around a protagonist's, either imaginary or human, protagonists who don't fit into the bodies that they present to the world. And I found this a very poignant and compelling theme, and such a shame because the standards of her day were an impediment to her. Although I suppose it's still a lasting problem for many women, even in today's culture. The other thing Rachel Field was a raconteuse. She performed in plays as a small child. She had a very charming voice, and I'm going to share that with you a little later. I've got this treasure of a recording from a man who sadly did not live to see my book get published, was one of the greatest Rachel Field fans on earth. And he was one of the early people who turned me in the right direction in my research, which started in the Cranberry Island Historical Society and sent me to archives in Massachusetts and to archives in California, the Academy Museum in California, to New York and Connecticut, and Tulane University in Louisiana. And I contacted someone in Florida who it was a 9-year journey for me. I got addicted to this notion of uncovering the secrets of her sorrow, of the mysteries of her life. And I did end up discovering what a lot of them were, but what I discovered more than anything was that this was an absolutely charming, beautiful person in the world who had so much more to give. And her premature death at age 47 was just one of the greatest tragedies that I have experienced in my brief life. And I want to tell you something else. I often forget to mention to people that one of the unique things about this book is that it's not just a biography. I set out my quest was to write Rachel Field's biography, because there was no full-length biography written about her, much as there were accolades right after she died and tributes in the Hornbook magazine and things like that. There was no full-length biography. And I couldn't imagine why. And that was one of the impetuses behind my beginning research. And as I became a Rachel Field expert during these 9 years of traveling and visiting archive collections, I got asked to be a guest speaker about Rachel Field in her hometown of Stockbridge, Massachusetts, all around Maine. Another island friend flew me to Tampa, Florida to speak at a literary conference. And I wanted to talk about writing Rachel Field's life, and people were interested in that. But every time I started talking about the fact that she and I shared this house in the state of Maine, and that there were these odd coincidences that seemed to connect us together, that arriving as teenagers and falling in love with the same island and having this shared pair of callings, which we both did, both writing and motherhood, were both powerful forces in our lives. And writing is what soared for her, and she longed for motherhood. Motherhood soared for me, and I longed to be a writer. So we had these oddly parallel experiences and ended up completing each other in unexpected ways over time. Plus, I tried to put this research away on numerous occasions because it took too long, it was too hard. I thought, this is impossible. I'm never going to get through it all. It's never going to be finished. And then something would happen to drag me back into the research. It almost felt like there were forces in the world disallowing me from putting this project away. And sometimes I even wondered if somehow it was Rachel Field calling me to keep going. I'd get a call from a library I visited saying, someone just came to drop off a new collection of Rachel Field stuff. And can we share your name? Or I'd get a call saying, I heard you're a Rachel Field expert. Will you come read her poetry on top of Cadillac Mountain? Or when I was just starting my research, I ended up finding myself in places that I needed to go to research Rachel's life. Because for example, my daughter's spring softball trip was to California in the very year when I was looking into the California years of Rachel Field, and all of the parents were invited. And so there I was in California to watch my daughter play softball. And that's when I did all my research on Rachel's California years and her California homes. And I went to the Warner Brothers archives and found amazing things. I visited the hospital where Rachel Field died and met a historian there who showed me the medical records book written in this loopy scrawl, this beautiful cursive handwriting in this giant old leather tome with the medical record from Rachel's last admission to the hospital, which was a very powerful experience. It seemed like every place there were archives of Rachel's material, it's where I needed to go in the role of my motherhood. The collections were in the colleges where my children went. And if I have time, I'm going to tell you one of the greatest coincidences of all. But first, what I'd like to do, because this kept on coming up in the talks I gave about Rachel Field, people said, you've got to include this stuff about you and Rachel sharing the house. And I said, no, this is her story. It's not my story. But then 8 years into this 9-year project, I went to a writing conference on Campobello Island, and one of the faculty instructors gave this writing prompt. He said, write a letter to someone who will never read it. 10 minutes, go. And I immediately wrote, Dear Rachel. I think what I wrote is, are you mad at me? Because I was very concerned that maybe I was revealing parts of her life she didn't want revealed, because I was putting together things that I think very few people knew during her life. She had a There was a secret romance and heartbreak that was in her life that I dug up because of a journal entry in an old diary on the shelf in the living room of the field house on Sutton Island, written by Rachel's mother. And I snooped for that mysterious man for years before I found him. In any case, after writing that letter to Rachel Field, I realized this might be a way I can include my story without really interrupting hers. So there is a biography of Rachel Field written in the third person, but then before every chapter, there's a letter in the first person written from me to Rachel. And this allowed me to pour out the feelings I was developing for this woman who became one of my dearest friends, even though we never met. And here's just a sample of one of those letters, part of one. Dear Rachel, 14 years after my first summer in your house, I began to get serious about getting to know you. It helped that I had become a year-round resident of the state of Maine by then. If you were working on getting my attention all that time, I apologize for taking so long to get around to the job. I have grown attached to the state of Maine just as you did. It is a place that loves its artists and writers, and I slowly, painstakingly slowly, found a place of belonging here as a writer. It was largely because of you that I finally broke into writing with conviction in the spring of 2008, when I bravely pitched an idea for a magazine feature to an editor at a writer's workshop in Southern Maine. I told her about sharing a house with a famous Maine writer from long ago, and she was intrigued. That summer, I got the assignment to write the story for Port City Life magazine. I began researching in earnest for the article that would come out the following summer. I feel strange talking to you about what I read in your letters and journals. There are times when I wonder if I might know you better now than anyone ever knew you in life, because I read your childhood journals, your college letters, and all the stories of your evolving adult womanhood all at once. I got to spread the entire timeline of your life before me and study it. I unearthed secret chapters and put them together with the unexplained non-secret parts and tried to figure out how everything fit. But I won't go into all of that just now. So there's an example of the letters that I wrote to Rachel that are an important part of the book, but I'd say they're probably 20% of the book. Okay, I think I would like to take you back to some slides now and show you some more pictures. Let's see. No, not that. Sorry for these technical issues. Okay.
While Robin is getting the pictures, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat function and I will relay them to Robin. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so this is the interior of Sutton Island, which is a kind of a magical world of moss and stone and wood. And Rachel Field wrote a lot of poetry and short stories about fairies and elves that lived in settings just like this one. So I often feel like this was her inspiration for a lot of her more imaginative work. And here are some pictures of the coastline, the rocky shoreline of Sutton Island. This is what the house looked like from the water in Rachel's time. We no longer have that fenced pathway in front of the house, but there it is. And I have pictures of Rachel at the house too, which is really pretty cool, pretty amazing. This is a good example. I'm quite sure this preceded Rachel's time. This is a shopping list still on the wall of the kitchen building. And I love the fact that it has hominy and lamp black and alum and some very interesting things that not many of us have on our shopping lists today. And I took some other pictures of Rachel's stuff. One of the things I like in here is the fact that I can show you some of her books when I stop screen sharing because I have them at my side here. But this key was the key to the kitchen, and that's the key we used to get into the kitchen for years and years. And what a treat it was for me when I discovered that one of her poems is called The Playhouse Key, and she named this house the Playhouse because when she bought it, she was just starting to make it as a writer and had some income from selling her plays. So what I was told was that's why she called it the Playhouse, with the double meaning of it being the place she loved to go play. And she loved Scotty dogs and always had a Scotty dog, and there's Scotty dog paraphernalia all around the house. So I liked the fact that one of her illustrations in her poetry book is called The Playhouse Key, and here are her initials, Rachel Lyman Field, that I assume she sewed right into that very linen napkin long, long ago. And there's the poem with her silhouette illustration. She did many silhouette illustrations, which I love. And I've got some more scenic shots. I'm going to try not to take too long because I tend to ramble. I get carried away talking about this place and this woman. Here's the bed that Rachel slept in with my little cousin sound asleep in it. And this is the living room where I found that old Wanamaker's diary that Rachel's mother, Lucy, had written in. And she wrote what she wrote. I'll tell you the story now. She wrote, Rachel and Lyle, all devotion. She has an almost maternal care of him. Now, on another day, she says, Rachel and Lyle have gone to do the marketing, which was quite a long journey. You had to get a boat, either the ferry, or you had to get a friend to drive you in their boat off to the shore and walk into town and carry all your stuff back in wheelbarrows or carts and lug it back onto the island. And so I know the man that Rachel married was named Arthur, and she married very late in life. She was 40 when she married. And I know that she tried desperately to have a child for a couple of years and was despairing of it, and did end up adopting. So it turned out she did in fact have a child, but this was all with a man named Arthur. And I never found anything about this Lyle, and it sounded like a love interest. And finally, one day I was on the brink of driving to Tulane University in Louisiana, because my youngest daughter was transferring to Tulane as a junior. And it was the first time she'd been, or I'd been, except for the preliminary visit. And so I was 2 weeks away from that. And it was one of those times I had put away all my Rachel Field stuff for weeks, maybe even months. And I thought, oh, I'll pull it out again and start browsing through it. I had, hundreds of pages of notes that I'd revisit and see if I could find a thread I might be able to follow again. And I found the name of a guy named Lyle Saxon, who was a writer around the same time. And I saw that, well, he did spend some time in New York City right around the time Rachel was there. So magic of the internet, in no time at all, I was in contact with 2 different biographers of Lyle Saxon. And the second one, she gasped on paper. And when I told her who I was and what I was doing, she said, I can't believe you live in Rachel Field's house. I'm sure that Lyle and Rachel were in love with each other. And I know he had a heartbreak. And I almost wrote a biography about Rachel Field because of these letters. These are the most incredible 30 or more letters that I've ever read in my life. And she wrote all of these letters to Lyle, and I know she was in love with him. And this had been years, and I was stunned and so excited. And I said, where are those letters? Can I see them? Are they accessible? And she said, yes, they're in the library at Tulane University. So out of nowhere, suddenly I was 2 weeks away from sitting in the archive library at Tulane with my daughter. When I was supposed to be moving her into her new apartment, I corralled her into being my research assistant, and we read all these incredible letters, hand illustrated by Rachel, clearly showing that she was deeply in love with this man. So one thing after another seemed to keep drawing me through the story. Another thing we had in common, before I knew Rachel had written all these plays, my children and their island friends and neighbors and cousins put on plays on Sutton Island in the summertime. And I later learned that Rachel put on a play, one of her own plays, with a bunch of island children, and she was the director back in 1918. So again, you know, we were strangely connected in so many ways. Here she is at last. I'm showing you a picture of Rachel and her dog, her dog named Spriggan. Her second Scotty was Trotty. And here's her Newbery medal in one of the archive collections. And I'd love to show you this because I became very familiar with this handwriting. And it's kind of an odd thing because nowadays, many people don't even know their best friend's handwriting anymore. I would have known my high school best friend's handwriting anywhere. I still would recognize it, but nowadays it's a little less common. But I became so familiar with Rachel's handwriting, I almost get warm feelings just seeing it here. And this is a letter telling about when she purchased the field house on Sutton Island. She says, as Elizabeth undoubtedly told you, I am being a most foolhardy creature this summer. This is the summer of 1922. Not only buying this bungalow here where we have been so many summers, but also parting company with my movie job. All goes merrily for the present, but occasionally I do take thought for the morrow, or rather next winter, when I shall probably join the ranks of Highland's bread line, or else take up my stand by the public library lions with a tin cup in my hand. I wish I could have a hand organ and monkey, but you know that New York generally forbids the latter. So that's just to give you a sense of her sort of the charm and humor of her letter writing, and also just so you could see the swoopy character in it. And she often squished in all kinds of marginalia along the edges, and it got all cramped at the end while she was trying to squish in the last bits of what she was trying to say.
Robin, somebody
Yeah.
was asking if they would like to see some of her illustrations, if you have any.
I do.
Having them? Oh, good.
Yes, yep, we're going
Okay.
to get to those very
Excellent.
shortly. Since I put Rachel and her dog, there's me and my dogs on the ferry on our way out to Sutton. I only have one of those left, sadly. That's one of my doggy friends. And here are my children at a younger stage. And here they are with 3 of the 4 in-laws. There's only one person missing. This is before he came on the scene. And that was really the focus of my Sutton time, unlike Rachel. And in some ways, I felt comforted in being so late with my writing career, because I felt like bringing children to the field house fulfilled a dream of Rachel Fields that she would have desperately loved to do. And it was an interesting thing, the way immersing myself in Rachel's life gave me a sense of deep satisfaction about the choices I had made in my own life. And it didn't matter that I was 60 before I published my first book, because, you know, I did other things. Here's a later photo of Rachel. And here she is with Betty Davis on the set of All This in Heaven Too, which was the nominated for Best Picture. And here's some of her silhouette pictures. This is one of my favorite kinds of artwork that she did. This is in the guest book of my next door neighbor on Sutton Island. But she also illustrated some books. She also hooked rugs. This is another form of her artwork. This is a Bear Island, which is another one right in that same cluster of islands off of Mount Desert Island. Quite a beautiful job, that one. And she made books. She sewed covers together and hand illustrated and hand colored these books for friends. She wrote, privately printed at the Playhouse Press, Sutton Island, Maine. This was a gift for her favorite editor. And that's at the end of that book. So there's illustrations. She sent us holiday cards, these silhouette shots, and then I have a bunch more interior shots. So I can see that I have gone way long, as I usually do. Pardon the rushing, but there's one thing I really wanted to share with you before I wrap it up, and that is this this audio recording from an old radio show called Rise and Recite, because hearing Rachel's voice, as I said, was one of the greatest gifts of my experience in life, really. And here she is.
Now, we have another star graduate of the Little Red Schoolhouse, one of our girls who has written one of the country's best-selling novels. I'm sure you've all read All This and Heaven Too. If you haven't, you ought to, because it's a great book. It's written by Rachel Field. Come right up here, Rachel. Good evening, my dear. We're all mighty proud of you, Rachel. Imagine you being a great writer. Little Rachel Field, who was always getting ink on her fingers. Didn't you used to wear your hair long down your back when you were in school, or was it in pigtails?
Oh, I wore them in 2 pigtails down my back. They used to get in the ink wells on the desk in back of me.
Oh, yes, I know. Well, you grew up to be a mighty good-looking woman, Rachel, and I wish all our scholars turned out so smart. I declare I talked to one of our boys a week or 2 ago, and he didn't know any more than he did when he was in the 5th grade. I asked him some questions about literature. And my goodness, I guess they're going to make a moving picture out of your novel, Rachel, I think.
Yes, yeah, it goes into production this summer.
You're going to write it for the movies yourself?
No, I'm working on a new novel.
Oh, I see. Well, you ought to try writing for the movies, Rachel. One of our boys is doing that very thing, and he's just started at it. He's doing pretty well. In fact, he's ahead of the game. He sent in 2 manuscripts to Hollywood, and they've already sent him back 5. Well, I understand our favorite recitation, or your favorite recitation, is that beautiful poem by Eugene Field, one that is beloved by all children from 6 to 60, called A Dutch Lullaby.
Yes.
That's its proper title, though many people call it Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. And I think that calls for a little music in back of it, don't you, Rachel?
Yes, I do. Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod one night sailed off in a wooden shoe, sailed on a river of crystal light into a sea of dew. Where are you going and what do you wish? The old moon asked the 3. We've come to fish for the herring fish that live in this beautiful sea. Nets of silver and gold have we, said Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. The old moon laughed and sang a song as they rocked in the wooden shoe. And the wind that sped them all night long ruffled the waves of dew. The little stars were the herring fish that lived in that beautiful sea. Now cast your nets wherever you wish, but never afeard are we. So cried the stars to the fishermen 3, Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. All night long their nets they threw for the stars in the twinkling foam. Then down from the sky came the wooden shoe, bringing the fishermen home. 'Twas all so pretty a sail, it seemed as if it could not be. And some folk thought 'twas a dream they dreamed of sailing that beautiful sea. But shall I name you the fishermen 3? Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. Winkin' and Blinkin' are 2 little eyes, and Nod is a little head. And the wooden shoe that sails the skies is a wee one's trundle bed. So shut your eyes while Mother sings of the wonderful sights that be, and you shall see the beautiful things as you rock on the misty sea, where the old shoe rocked the fishermen 3, Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod.
Okay, so I'm going to stop my share right there and wrap things up so that I do have a little time left for, I don't know how strict our finishing.
We're okay, but there's one interesting comment and from Stephanie, and I swear to God, I was thinking the same thing, that Rachel Field's voice has a similar quality to Glinda, the Good Witch in the Wizard of Oz, and a little bit of Dorothy.
Yep.
Isn't it true that Rachel Field almost worked on that screenplay too?
Gone with the Wind.
Oh, Gone
Yes.
with the Wind. Okay.
Yes, she was on the short list. I found a archived document, and there were about 14 names that included Sherwood Anderson and other like famous writers of the time, but she was one of like 5 of them who actually had checks next to their names. So she was in the running for doing the screenplay for Gone with the Wind, but I don't think she was that interested in doing screenplays. She did not do the screenplays for her own books. And I should also have said a big shout out, thank you to Stephanie Lynn Kleiman, who connected me Chappaqua Library in the first place and helped me set this up. And thank you, Stephanie. That was a wonderful thing that you did, and I'm so happy to be here. I wanted to recite one of my very favorite poems that Rachel Field wrote to wrap things up. And I also wanted to read one quote to you from one reviewer. This is one of the favorite things I wrote because it captures what I hope to accomplish with this book. We became friends, Rachel and I, and I hope that maybe I've done as much for her as she did for me, and that I can only hope that, but I feel it to be true. And this one reviewer named Alan Adams wrote, "Before I read this book, I had never known Rachel Field, and now I'll never forget her." And I'd like to read you this poem called "If Once You Have Slept on an Island." The first poem I actually do of Rachel's. "If once you have slept on an island, you'll never be quite the same. You may look as you looked the day before and go by the same old name. You may bustle about in street and shop. You may sit at home and sew, but you'll see blue water and wheeling gulls wherever your feet may go. You may talk to your neighbors of this and that and close to your fire keep, but you'll hear ship whistle and lighthouse bell and tides beat through your sleep. Or you won't know why and you can't say how such change upon you came. But once you have slept on an island, you'll never be quite the same." Thank you so much for being here, everybody.
That was wonderful. Well, we have a couple of questions.
Yes, please.
The first question, since she had such a challenge learning to read, do you think she had dyslexia?
I've had that question before. It's very possible. And I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not even sure that was named at that time in history. She certainly ended up doing just fine. She went to Radcliffe as a special student, but she couldn't be officially accepted because of her math and science scores being so terrible. But she was a very, very bright woman, that's for sure.
Another question is, did you try to find her family, siblings, or the man she married?
She had only one surviving sibling. She was one of 5, and all her siblings died young, except one sister who ended up institutionalized for mental illness in her 20s, or late in her 30s, I guess. And neither of them ever had children, so there were no descendants. And I will tell, I didn't want to have too many spoilers, but sadly the daughter that Rachel Field adopted also died young. She died at the age of 21. So there was really nobody. When I had to get permission to access her medical records, I had to go to some distant cousin from another branch of the Field family.
Actually, and then somebody did ask, what did she die from?
Rachel Field?
Yes.
You'll have to read the book to find that out.
Gotcha. Okay, well, the rest were just compliments. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. Congratulations on the book. I look forward to reading it from somebody from high school. And thank you. I copied one of the poems. I'm ready to copy that poem about the island.
Isn't that an
wasn't been on the island?
Yeah. There's one other thing I wanted to share with everybody, and I meant to say this at the beginning. And it's a memory about Chappaqua Library, because my mother actually grew up in that area too, and my mother too went to the Chappaqua schools. She went to the Bell School when it was Horace Greeley School,
right?
And when I went to the library, it's where I got my very first ever library card, when they embedded that little piece of metal in the card. You'd put chunk through the scraper thing. And that was when the library was right near the Greeley house at the bottom of the hill. And I have such fond memories. It was one of the most exciting things. I have a vivid memory of getting my own library card and being able to take books out of that Chappaqua library. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah, I know that you're in a new location now, and I have been there, and it's beautiful. But I have a warm place in my heart for the Chappaqua Library that goes way back. So
Well, it's now a senior center, but it still has the words, the lettering on top of the entrance, Chappaqua Library. And I'm sure it
that's okay.
confuses many people. Um,
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
another thing. Thank you for your magical book. I copied one of her poems. I copied some people for a poetry booklet. Oh, I copied some people for a poetry booklet I made for my 7th grade English class many years ago. I just
that's-
ordered the book, Pointed People from a Used Bookseller, which, as you know, includes this poem.
Oh, Nancy, that's so cool. And you are in for a treat. That's going to be
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
And
it's
another
really
one,
fun. Yeah, go ahead.
another great, I love the book, Wonderful Reading and Reflections, and from high school. And then Nancy Cora here, a Greeley classmate of yours. I really enjoyed your talk, and I will promptly order the field house.
Thank you. This is so great to see some of my classmates out there, and I wish I could see you. And thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm very, very grateful to have you come aboard on this journey of mine. It's been quite a whirlwind.
Well, it's been a really, oh, another one. How heavily was she influenced by Emily Dickinson? I live in Maine too. Carol Durkin.
Yeah, Emily Dickinson was very important to her. She cites Emily Dickinson in some of her letters, and was very impressed with her work. And so, yeah, I think that Emily Dickinson was an important influence on her for sure.
Oh, this is wonderful. This was such a wonderful thing, Robin. Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. But I felt so connected to this. So you summer in Rachel Field's house.
Yes.
And you winter in another place. That's just wonderful. You're a lucky person.
I
And
am.
everything worked out very well. Well, thank you again so much for coming, and so much for reading some of the excerpts of your book.
Okay, thank
And
you.
thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you at some of the other programs. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat function now before I end. I'll just wait another second or two.
Also, my website is robincliffordwood.com, and I'm very, very happy to have people contact me anytime. If you have questions later on, I do book group visits, and there's, so I'd love to be in touch. So feel free.
How about I put it back into the chat? Your website, it's Robin
Cliffordwood.com. I purchased the home in '94. Someone just asked that.
Oh.
Yeah, so when I bought the house, 70 years after Rachel. Yeah.
But it still had her things. And that must have been such an experience to move into someone's house and to find the previous owner's personal items.
Absolutely.
Not just everybody would have, some people might have dumped it, but obviously to you it was a treasure trove.
Yeah, well, partly because we're not very good at cleaning stuff out. So, so yeah, and a lot of it I didn't even know was connected to Rachel until I started learning about her life. And then I knew, all these Scotty dog things must be hers. And then
somebody said, I'm sorry, it's surprising that her possessions were still there.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot were also gone, but I mean, she had magazines in the attic, and there was, a lot of the stuff preceded her. As I said, the family that lived there before her also left all their furniture for her to have when she moved in. But I know there were books that had her name in it on the shelf, but she was in California at the time, and it's an ordeal to move anything on or off that island. You've got to lug it on your back or in a wheelbarrow or hire a barge, which is, as we know, it can take months to find a time to get a barge to come on the island. And if the tides are wrong or the weather's bad, you can't get in at all. And so they just tend to sell the house as is.
Yeah, but it's a wonderful place to go in the summertime, I'm sure.
It's quite a getaway.
That image of the trees and the moss.
Yeah,
I could live with that all day long. That was absolutely exquisite, and your photography was really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it was good to
Thank you
see
so
pictures
much.
of family. So as I will end this, no more questions. Thank you all for coming. And I hope to see you at all the programs at the library. Bye-bye.